Right, so good night once again, and thanks for logging on. We are back on the topic of relationships, and last week we took a look at the Rattlesnake TV podcast with the gentleman Jake and the featured guest Rachel Wilson. And we heard a little bit from her. We kind of got an introduction to her and her book and her thoughts and her work in the study of feminism. Now, I want to point out that in the video, I've placed several links in the description that single out a number of different podcasts that Rachel Wilson would have been involved in. And then I also put a number of links to podcasts that Carrie Gress was involved in. So I really do encourage you, if you are interested in having a more thorough, detailed understanding of feminism, what it is, what impact it has had on the world from a Christian perspective, in a very detailed way, I very much encourage you to take a look at those podcasts, listen to the thoughts, listen to the ideas. These women are very, very brilliant, very smart, very detailed, very thorough in their study, and good at explaining themselves as well, right? Very articulate, really, really smart women. And they really pinpoint the issues. Now, maybe not in a summarized way, because these podcasts are hour long, 2 hours long, etc. And it would really be nice to get summary and some bullet points. But the point is, if you got that time and you're interested, please go ahead and watch their podcasts, and you can get very familiar with this work of the devil and what it really is doing. Tonight, I thought I would give us a little dip into the Carrie Gress world. She's a completely different, well, not completely, because they're both very academic and scholastic, but, you know, different personality, different vibe and everything, but still very, very useful, very, very helpful in understanding this whole idea of feminism. This video is a bit longer than the one last week. I don't know if you're going to get through the whole thing, but again, you can either go into the description box in the video before, or you can go into the description box for this video, and you should see several different links to podcasts that they were featured in. All right, so without further ado, let's take a little look into the Carrie Gress view of things, all right?
It is my pleasure today to be joined by author Carrie Gress. She is author of the new book, The End of Woman: How Smashing the Patriarchy Has Destroyed Us. Carrie, thank you so much for being with us today to talk about your new book.
My pleasure. It's great to be here.
Well, you are a fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. You've authored 10 books. You're a wife. You're a mom to 5 kids. Talk a little bit about how you started researching and writing on the feminist movement. What sparked your interest?
Yeah, it's actually funny because when I was in graduate school, I swore I would never get involved in women's issues. I mean, I think I even said it out loud. And so I still kind of laugh that it's something that I'm interested in. But one of the reasons why I didn't like it was I felt like there was a lot of good content out there for women to sort of skirt around, the radical feminist movement. But so much of it was written very academically, and it was not anything that I could pass on to friends or family or to people that I knew that were really struggling with their lives and lifestyles. And so anyway, it just was one of those things that just sort of came about. It's just been very gradual, but feminism itself, I really didn't intend to take it on until, in this huge way I do with this book, until I started looking into first wave feminism. And I'm sure you've heard so many people say, feminism was hijacked in the second wave. And so I was just expecting to sort of dig into the first wave and thought, well, it's just going to be all these really nice, lovely things about women and, much purer understanding of womanhood. And I was just shocked at what I found because it was so different. And it was also so clear to me that what we're seeing in the second wave actually had its roots in the first wave. So that's really kind of the arc of, how we got to this point.
And I think that's one of the most surprising things that I found as I began reading your book was we hear so often this differentiation between the waves of feminism and how different they are. And when you started talking about kind of this through line through all of them, it was like, wow, that's so fascinating. So I want to dive deeper into that in a moment. But before we get to that, I thought it'd be helpful to just first define some terms, and starting with, feminism. When we talk about the feminist movement, when we say that word feminism, for the purposes of our discussion, what do you mean by that?
No, I think that's a fantastic question, because it's used almost differently by every woman, I think. And, the one thing that seems to be kind of common is this idea that feminism is you're pro-woman. The problem is, of course, is that what I mean by pro-woman is going to be very different than what Gloria Steinem means by pro-woman, and that's where things break down. So the definition that I work with now is really focused on three elements that are, I think, run through first wave, second wave. There are obviously going to be variations of this, and I'll go into those three in a second. There are going to be variations of it, and I think it's really incumbent upon people that still call themselves feminists to define what they mean, because these three are so pernicious. But the first one is free love, which is the end of monogamy and really the breakdown of the family. The second one is what started out as being called restructuring society. It later was called smashing the patriarchy, and actually Engels had something to do with that. This wasn't just some feminist idea. In fact, a lot of these ideas did come from men. So that's the other ones, smashing the patriarchy. And then the third one is just the involvement of the occult. So those are the three threads that I found running, throughout the first and the second wave, and certainly we're seeing it now in the third and fourth waves of feminism. So that's what I mean by feminism when I'm using it in this context.
Yeah, so I just want to quickly jump in there. I would have mentioned this several times before. Whenever you're looking at feminist podcasts and such, they often refer to these different waves. And as she just said, I just want to reiterate what she said basically. Many people think of it as the first iteration of feminism, the first wave, as they call it, was noble. It was justified. It was right. It was proper. It was helpful in creating balance in society and righting some of the wrongs that were in society. Okay? And she discusses it a little bit later on in the podcast. But these people go on to say, it is only until the second and the third and the fourth wave of feminism that things started to go somewhat awry. Things started to become corrupt and perverted and started to go to the extreme, too far. Okay? But what she's saying is, again, same thing that Rachel Wilson was saying last week. What she's saying is, what she has found in her studies is that there are three core principles that run right throughout each wave of feminism. So the first, the second, the third, and the fourth. I don't know which wave we're at. I don't know even if we're at the fourth. I don't know. But what she's saying is that, no, if you really do the research, you're going to see these three lines that are continuous throughout the entire ideology, from its inception to the version that we are currently experiencing. And those are one, free love, basically encouraging women not to be monogamous, not to settle down with one husband and to marry one husband and to procreate with that one person, but rather to liberate her and allow her, through birth control and other means of contraception, go out there and have sex with how many other men you want to have sex with, okay? And of course, we have birth control, hormonal birth control, and contraceptives. But then we also have the public acceptance of abortion, which is basically murder. This gives the woman the freedom to maneuver, okay? Society is saying, don't marry, don't pin yourself down into marriage. You be free, you be liberated. You don't have to follow the rules. It's just like what the Bible says. Let us break their bands asunder and cast away their yoke from us, right? This is the human rebellion. Really is the satanic rebellion, but this is what humans do when they subscribe to the satanic doctrine. Let us rebel. Let us rebel against the rules of God, the fetters, the restrictions. We don't want that. We break that all off. And now we're liberated. And now we can have sex with whoever we want as often as we want. We don't have to worry about becoming pregnant because we have hormonal birth control available to us right now. and several other different means of contraception. And should we be irresponsible? Should something not go according to our plan, or should we change our minds? We still have the option of abortion. And society rose up and said, no, that's not good. And then, of course, that spirit pushes and pushes and pushes and says, no, pro-choice, my body, my right. All that is the spirit of the devil. Now, let me just point this out. And it should be obvious by now. But let me just say this quickly. It looks all complicated, right? When you look at the world and when you look at everything that's going on, it looks very complicated. But it's not complicated. It's very simple. There's God and then there's the devil. God has one way, the devil fights against God's way. That's all it is. From beginning to end. God doesn't change. The devil just tries to change everything that God has said. All right? So the Bible tells us that the devil operates through lies and through murder. We see feminism. We see transgenderism. We see them as two different things. It's the same thing. We see COVID-19 vaccines. We see abortions en masse. We see wars and so on. It's all the same thing. It's just death, murder. The devil is deceiving people in various different ways, and he's killing them in various different ways. It's nothing new. It's not complex. That's what the devil is like. When you see people rise up in war, killing one another, 60 million people dying, that's just the devil murdering and using lies, ideas to infiltrate the minds of men and send them hard in a direction. Right? Don't forget, the devil can't come down here and just do stuff. Men have the agency and the authority to operate on the earth. If the devil wants to do something here, he has to convince men to cooperate with his will. And that's where ideologies come from. That's where ideas are necessary. That's why he came to Eve with an idea. He didn't come and take her hand and say, pick up that and get the food and then put it in her mouth. He says, I need to find a way to get her to self-sabotage. I need to convince her to eat that food. I can't do it for her, but I can trick her into doing it. That's all ideologies are. God has his way. All these alien ideologies that you see popping up, it's just the devil trying to convince men to self-sabotage. All right? So with feminism and abortion and so on, you're self-sabotaging. You're killing all your children. All right? You're killing all your children. With free love and so on, female promiscuity, running all over the place, having sex with different men, you're destroying your ability to pair bond. You're destroying your self-worth. You're confusing yourself and making yourself feel worthless. Don't mind how many times you want to mask it. All right? All these things are just self-sabotaging. By all this feminism, you're breaking up the family. You're destroying stuff. Your stuff. Right? But we don't see it. We see it as all feminism. It's not all of that. Right? It's just the devil. Two things. He's lying to people in different ways, telling them different things, and he's murdering them through the same lies. Okay? But back to this point, she's saying there's three roots, three chords that run through the feminist doctrine, regardless of what wave it is. One is free love. The encouragement of promiscuity. Girls can do whatever they want with their sexual selves. One. We know that that is in direct opposition to God's will and God's commandments towards men and women. Right? So this is a contra God principle. What's the next principle? Smashing the patriarchy or restructuring society. In other words, God structured the society. There's a man and there's a woman. The man is the head of the household. The woman follows the man. The woman submits, comes under the mission of that man. And they cooperate. And they bear children. Life. The woman nurtures the children. The man provides for the family, protects the woman. They work together in a team, loving one another. Now, I'm not saying that all the demonstrations of this perfect union that God has designed were perfect, because sinful man and sinful woman, we often get it wrong. But the point is, God creates this perfect union, this perfect way of operating. Women have their role to play, men have their role to play. And this, of course, builds strong people and strong families, because the children are getting the love and the nurturing of their mother. Direct, proper attention, right? It's not some, as the Bible calls it, a hireling, does not care for the sheep. Okay, somebody that you hire to watch the sheep, they don't care for the sheep. But I am the good shepherd. I care for the sheep. So that concept, John chapter 10, I'm saying to you, when you outsource mothering of your children to other people, they don't care for your sheep the way that you're going to care for your sheep. They're not going to educate your children the way that you would educate your children. Okay. Furthermore, you're not sure what they're telling your children. You're not sure how they're building the concepts and precepts in your children's mind. You're outsourcing the development of your child to some teenager or to some liberal arts degree graduate from some woke school, and they're teaching your children about sexuality, and they inserting all sorts of stuff that God never, ever, ever agreed to. Okay, so God creates this proper union that allows the woman to build up her children, and they love one another and they work with one another. But one of the principal tenets of the feminist doctrine that runs through from the beginning right to the end is we want to restructure society. We want to break the nuclear family apart, right? We want to remove the children from under the care of the woman and the man. We want to take the children under our care. This is the government. This is the state. We want to indoctrinate the children with our doctrine. We want to encourage women to separate from their husbands. We want to make marriage an unattractive proposition for men. So we really tear them apart in divorce and crush them and really do our most to destroy them in divorce. And we incentivize women to divorce, no-fault divorce, anything at all that you want to do, you can do, and just divorce. And you get half, and you get alimony, and you get all of that. So they make the marriage process a very, very unattractive proposition for men. So men naturally stop wanting to marry, okay? And you're pulling the women away, and you're telling the artists, the singers, if you look at it separate, if you just look at society from different perspectives, and you don't recognize that there's a master planner of this environment and this world that we're living, it will seem confusing, but it's the same person. It's the devil running things. He has the same agenda. You lie to people and murder them. John chapter 8, right? You were a liar from the beginning. When you speak of a lie, you speak of your own. You are a murderer from the beginning, right? That's what the devil is. And that's what he's doing. So he's lying to everybody through the Taylor Swifts, through the Ice Spice, through the Sexy Reds, through the Beyoncés, through the Doja Cats, through all these people. You're lying. You're sending propaganda out to these people. You're sending propaganda through Oprah. You're sending propaganda through TV. You're sending propaganda through the news, right? You're working the media. You're working the feminism doctrines. You're working the war doctrines. You're working the COVID vaccine doctrines. You're poisoning people. And you're just killing people. Telling lies to them and killing them. So that's another tenet of the feminist ideology. Restructure the society. Break it apart. Don't let God's structure prevail, because that makes it difficult for us to control people. We want to break that up and get the children for ourselves, pit the man and the woman against one another. That's your feminism. And that's obviously in direct opposition to the will of God. And the third thing that runs throughout the different waves of feminism is the practice of occultism. right? No, you don't get any worse than that. So blatant witchcraft and then some obviously anti-God principles. Those are the common threads throughout all the waves of feminism. All right? I hope this is making sense to you. Let's carry on.
I love that you take us all the way back in the book to the 1700s, and you talk about a woman named Mary Wollstonecraft. You say that she's, and by many, she's considered the first feminist.
Yeah.
Who was she, and why is she really considered the start of the feminist movement?
So Mary Wollstonecraft was a woman that she was very much involved with a lot of the revolutionary ideas connected with the French Revolution. She and Thomas Paine actually was helped her out. Much of his help was quiet because he didn't want to detract from his other efforts. Certainly in the French Revolution and beyond, people think of him as sort of the first socialist, actually. He went from writing Common Sense in the United States and then just kept going more and more deeper into what we would now call leftism. And actually, so she was very much influenced by him. And you can see that in her work. I mean, he wrote a book called a tract to defend the French Revolution called The Rights of Man. Well, she then wrote another piece in response to Edmund Burke, actually, who was writing against the French Revolution. But it was called The Vindication of the Rights of Man. So she's following up Thomas Paine, and then she writes her kind of magnum opus, or what people know her for, The Vindication of the Rights of Woman, which followed on that. So her work follows in many respects a lot of the intellectual threads of the French Revolution. She was very much, Talleyrand was someone that she was involved with, had a relationship with, and actually I think she dedicated the book to him. So she's deep into that kind of thought. But in the meantime, she was in Paris during the French Revolution. She had a relationship with an American man. She became pregnant. They never married, but he actually told the U.S. Embassy that she was his wife. And so she was actually spared from the guillotine because of her American affiliation. So she had this daughter out of wedlock and moved back to England. And then from there, she ended up meeting again a man that she'd already met through Thomas Paine, a man named William Godwin, who was at the forefront of the anarchist movement and the end of monogamy, the free love movement. He just thought marriage was this kind of slavery, and he was kind of known throughout England and France and, in more radical circles, and had kind of a celebrity because of it. So she marries him after they get pregnant also, and they have Mary Godwin, later Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein. So what she set forth was really kind of this French revolutionary, crush everything, get rid of patriarchy, what I guess you would call the hierarchy in the church and in the military and all those kinds of things. And she's trying to, kind of create this equality among men and women. And so that's really the first spark, you could say, that set off the movement from there. So yeah, she's a fascinating character. She herself had horrible parents, really incredibly awful example of what men and women should be. And I think that kind of comes through in her work as well. So yeah, she's a very colorful woman. She died in childbirth, actually, when Mary Godwin was born. So that's really the end of her story at that point. And after that, of course, the story moves on of feminism with Mary Godwin Shelley and Mary Shelley's husband, Percy Bysshe Shelley, the poet, the well-known poet who integrated a lot of Mary's ideas.
So how did her ideas then go and translate into
these other things?
The other things and really those waves. First, obviously, starting with the first wave of feminism, and moving along.
Yeah, well, this is where I think it's really interesting because I think very few people realize that feminism, these three pieces, the occult, smashing the patriarchy, and free love, all came together in the work of Percy Shelley. In his poetry, he was trying to create what he called the women's revolution. So he's taking ideas from Godwin, he's taking ideas from Wollstonecraft, putting them together, adding his own. He had this, this was a barbaric man, actually. He was involved in the occult. There's this whole string of suicides of women that he had seduced, including his wife, had committed suicide, his first wife. So he was really an awful man, but what he saw was kind of the vision of Mary Shelley's parents, which was, this women's revolution where There's no monogamy. There's no this marriage. All of these things are just erased, and people just live this bucolic life, without any reference to their human nature. And he concocts this, actually, interestingly, around the same time that his wife is writing Frankenstein. He develops this character named Sithna, who is basically the first independent woman in all of literature. She has no husband. She has no children. The one relationship she does have is to Satan. And this woman becomes kind of the model in the minds of later feminists in the 1800s, including Elizabeth Cady Stanton, as the movement is moving forward. So he's the one that kind of put his stamp on it and made it, gave people someone tangible to think about in these very new and radical terms.
Right. So let me just jump in real quick. I just want to point out that real fast. She's saying that some of these principal figures in the feminist movement, they would have passed on ideas, and kind of used ideas from amongst one another, etc. But this particular guy, he was a writer and he wrote some books. But in this particular book, he came up with this character called Sithna or whatever. And at that point, she's the first truly independent woman in literature, period. Before that, people just associated a woman with marriage and children and that type of thing. But he is creating for his audience a vision. Okay? Have God said that a woman should be such and such and such? God has not said that, but a woman can be something else. And he's painting a vision for people, saying, okay, this is what she's like. She has no husband. She has no children. She does have a relationship, though. She has a spiritual relationship with Lucifer. Now, I don't know how that's a good pitch. Anyhow, the point is, he's fleshing out a life, fleshing out an idea. It's the same thing he did with Eve. He says, if you do such and such, this is what is going to happen. And he paints a picture for her. And he says, oh, isn't this interesting? Isn't this desirable? And he does the same thing. Now, this is what the devil does in media all the time. It's just a story. And then you hear the story over here, and then you hear the story over there, and you hear the story over there. And it comes from different places. And eventually you start to think that that story is the truth. That's what propaganda is. All right? And this is just an early example. Of course, there are several examples in life before this, but I'm just wanting to point out to you that that's what's happening here. This is the use of the arts, the literary arts in this instance, to offer an idea to society, to put flesh on an idea and to help society to visualize something new, something different, something that God had not taught them. Okay? That's what this guy is doing. But let's move on.
I'm just so fascinated by this because I have been in the journalism space for quite a few years, and I've interviewed so many people that write and talk about feminism. I co-host the Problematic Women podcast.
Right.
I've never heard anyone bring up the occult roots within the feminist movement. How did you discover this, and why don't people talk about this?
Yeah, no, I mean, part of it is it feels old and unimportant. I think that's some of it. It's 1800s, who cares? And I think we also have this sense of the 1800s as being a very pristine time, sort of Victorian mores and whatnot. And, I can tell you my research sort of blew all of that out of the water in terms of prostitution, abortion, all this unfaithfulness. I mean, it just was everywhere. I looked, but I had already sort of started seeing pieces of it. There's one book that brought a lot of the elements to light for me and I discovered it several years ago, and it's called Satanic Feminism, and it's by a Swedish professor. It's published by Oxford University Press. It's in English. And, it's one of those books that when I first read it, I thought that he was against satanic feminism. And of course, the deeper I get into the footnotes and, references, I'm beginning to realize no, he actually thinks this is a positive thing. So it was really fascinating to read because he goes through this period of feminism, very first wave feminism, that most people don't touch, and is making all of these different connections, incredibly well-researched book. So from there, that provided me with something of a guideline or, kind of a backbone for my research. But then I was able to dig into primary sources and secondary sources and start, really piecing together the bigger picture of what all this means and, the incredible damage connected with all of it.
Yeah. So obviously in our conversation, we're even using those terms, first wave, second wave, third wave of feminism. Is that the right way or do you think the most accurate way to talk about feminism? Because I think mentally we all break it down into first wave feminism good, second wave gets a little questionable, third wave is super radical. Should we be thinking about it differently?
Yeah, I think that is actually a really interesting question. I think that, in my own mind, I don't actually separate them up that way anymore, partially because in the 1800s, the occult is playing a very active role in the 1800s. You've got the Great Awakening in the United States. You've got seances. You also really see this connection. People, electricity is happening and the telegram and, all these ways people are connecting with people in long distance fashions. And so something like a seance doesn't feel so crazy anymore. They're just like these telephone poles between this life and the next. This is what they thought mediums were and didn't think anything about, having a seance and those kinds of things. So that's a fascinating part. I think when you get to the 1900s, that the dynamic changes significantly because then you're venturing into communism. You're also venturing into the influence of Nietzsche and existentialism and, all of these long names that I think blur people's eyes over. But I think that it just fundamentally changed because feminism started pairing itself easily with communism. Communism was worried about restructuring society and ending, monogamy and the nuclear family, and they were atheists. So there was really just one piece, this occult piece, this atheist and occult piece that were different between the two movements. And I think that was easily overcome by the two groups, the communists and the feminists, and they realized that they had the same ends in mind and could work together. So I think that happens. And then second wave really is just this explosion of what we now know to be the woke movement. It's these Frankfurt thinkers that really injected the ideas of the New Left and the Frankfurt School into the feminist movement. And you see a lot of overlap. Angela Davis is a name that comes up over and over again. In fact, I just read Christopher Rufo's new book, The American Cultural Revolution, I think it's called, which is excellent. But it was really interesting to see how much Angela Davis played in his trajectory. And, there's overlap, of course, with feminism as well. So, and I think everything just spirates out of that. I don't think you have further waves from that. I think it's just all a big mess.
Okay. I just want to point out real fast, another brilliant example of two seemingly completely divorced agendas. We got feminists on one side. On the surface, they're concerned with making things better for women and giving women equal opportunity and so on. And on the other side, we got communism, who is after a complete shift in society. And basically, one of the principal tenets in communism is they see the world one way. There's the oppressor class, and then there's the victim class. And in communism, they're saying this isn't right. There should not be an oppressor class and there shouldn't be a victim class. What we're going to do is we're going to go in there, overthrow the oppressors, and make everything equal. Okay, that's their proposition. But of course, we know that whenever people employ communist ideas on a society, things go very, very badly. And we have several different experiments, if you will, to justify that thought. We have the Soviet Union and all the deaths that happen as a result of it. We have the Maoist regime in China and all the deaths that happened as a result of that. We have the collapse of Cuba. We have the collapse of Venezuela. And I can't think of any more right now, but basically, communism does not lead to prosperity. It leads to poverty. And it has led to many, many deaths. Feminism, a totally different thing, leads to many, many abortions and the destruction of family. But the point is, these are two completely different things in a sense, but it's all the devil's plan. They're very, very similar as far as the devil is concerned. And he says, yeah, we can work together. We can bring this stuff together because essentially, don't forget, the devil is the one pulling the strings in the background. So they're able to come together and they're able to unite around the same principle, which is let's restructure society. Let's destroy the patriarchy, right? The man rule with logos and knowledge and religion and that type of thing. Let's overthrow that and let's bring about our own egalitarian type thinking, right? Just another example of how two seemingly different ideologies are really just the same devil tricking people and killing them. All right, but let's move on.
And answering this question, I mean, maybe a better way to sort of bring all these pieces together is to say the question the early feminists were asking was, how do we make women more like men? And if we look at it through that lens, then all of a sudden sort of the last 200 years make sense. And we see, they are trying to make us men. And we see that happening biologically now. We have the technology to turn our bodies into something that appears more masculine, even though it can never be done thoroughly. But yeah, I think that kind of bridges these pieces and connects them together in ways that might be difficult to see sometimes. But that fundamental question, I think, is how you can sort of see the tweaking going on. And now even the infighting between those who are for trans and those who are against trans. It's just the ideology is really turning against itself.
Yeah. You write in the book, The End of Woman, that feminism, the feminist movement, their failure at its root is a misdiagnosis of what actually ails women.
Yeah.
How has the feminist movement misdiagnosed what is ailing women?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. I mean, partially because we can see by the fruit of it. And I'll go back to giving you an answer in a second, but I want to just point out it hasn't made women happier. We see women are more depressed, suicides are higher, suicide rates are higher, divorce rates, even things like STDs, all of these are sort of contributing to that. But the solution that feminism has offered is really one, again, back to that idea of making us more like men. Early feminists looked at the struggles that women went through, and, believe me, there were enormous and awful things that women went through. Most women were not that many steps away from destitution or prostitution or, something horrible, starving, horrible things happening to them. So something had to be done, but their decision was to move in a way that didn't edify or didn't help women, certainly as mothers, didn't help them become better mothers, didn't help them with their relationships with men. And then, of course, over time, you gradually see this just turn into power, where feminism really becomes a question of power and control. And of course, people can't live their lives that way in any kind of happy way when you're busy trying to be, in control and in power over things that you're not meant to be in power of. Furthermore, being told that your husband is your enemy and that your children are your enemy. That's really what we've ended up with by asking that fundamental question. So rather than saying, how do we help women, bear their children or deal with difficult husbands, it's just get rid of them. That's been really the solution, is make us this independent woman that Percy Shelley drew out for us, where we don't have any of these encumbering details, and then we'll be really free. I think that's the message that I keep sending to us.
Right. I just want to jump back in here real fast and state the obvious again. I just love when these people summarize these ideologies for us in this very, very simple way. She's saying, look, basically what the feminists were trying to do is make women more like men. Okay? They thought that men had a good life. Men were not oppressed. Men were having a better time. That's what they thought. And so let's make the women like men. So then all of a sudden, a husband and the encumbrance of a husband and the having to abide by the rules of a husband, or having to be bothered with the negotiation and the compliance and the agreement with a husband, instead of having to do all that, we just discard the husband. Instead of having to deal with the complexity of raising children and going through childbirth and all that, we discard all that. We abort the child, or don't have any children, don't have any marriage. I mean, it sounds funny, but aborting children kills people. Not having marriages, you don't create life. Okay? So you got the birth rate declining, we discussed that. You got abortions happening, we discussed that. You got female suicides on the rise because they're not made to be like that. Okay? Maybe one of these days we will take a look at this woman who, as a social experiment, decided to live like a man for a certain amount of months. And she presented as a man, and she lived in the world as if she was a man. And she actually ended up killing herself because she recognized that how men were living is a completely different experience to how women live, right? She recognized that women have a far bigger support system. People are always reaching out to women. People are always checking in on women. People are always accommodating women. And she recognized that men are almost invisible, that no one checks for the men. She recognized that women treated her very, very poorly as a man because, as part of her experiment, she would go and date women and that type of thing. And she was recognizing how awful women would treat her. And that woman ended up killing herself because of, well, we don't know all the details, but that experience for her was absolutely horrible. Even Miss Carrie Gress is talking about the difficulties that women had, and we can't discount that because obviously women had very, very difficult times in the past. And this podcast is not about this, but don't forget that men were not down there playing games and having a whole set of fun. Men were doing the wars. Men were doing the work. Men were doing the fighting. It was tough for women, but it was tough for men. And it's the men that die in war en masse. It's the men that die, not the civilians, not the women and the children. In fact, back in the day, chivalry was more of a thing where men would prioritize women, protect women, and such and such. Now, in this equal day, where men are more equal to women and women are more equal to men and so on, you don't see chivalry practiced in the same way as before. But men had it really, 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 really tough. Okay, they were the ones working, doing all the hard work. Okay, a lot of work that no woman would want to do, right? All the heavy lifting and all of the drilling and the oil rigs and the steel manufacturing plants and all of that. That ain't easy work. Skyscrapers and construction. No woman want to be doing that, so don't get tied up. Men were having it difficult as well, and they were the ones drafted to work. You could be 21 and you could be dead by 22, 23 simply because you had to go to war, because all the men had to go to war, right? So yes, women had it tough. Men had it tough, right? Don't get tied up. So yeah, let's move on to the next.
So then, Carrie, if the feminist movement was not the answer to the ails of women, how could women have overcome things like, having limited options in their career and the right to vote without the feminist movement? Was the feminist movement a necessary evil?
Yeah. And that's another great question. I think especially in light of the fact that a lot of us feel like we can't question the feminist movement because you feel guilty. I have an advanced degree and I work and, all of those things that I obviously feel grateful for. But I think that the reality is that the feminist movement actually has taken more from us than it has given us because it has just so narrowed who we are. Moreover, I think a lot of the things that happen could have happened very easily with like a natural law kind of reasoning. We didn't actually have to completely undo all of Western civilization in order to get these things. And, look at what the cost has been. I think, especially if we look at the abortion numbers, I think that piece alone is really the most startling because feminism is so at the heart of, breaking that bond between mother and child and allowing abortion to be something that's conscionable. There are actually more abortions internationally than there are human deaths for any other cause together. So for like last year, I think there was somewhere around between 60 and 64 million deaths internationally. The Guttmacher Institute said there was something around 72 or 73 million abortions last year. So we're actually aborting more people than are actually dying from any other thing in the world, which, is astronomical when you think about the ideologies of the past. You think about Hitler, you think about Stalin. Now, these numbers just eviscerate anything that they ever did on a human scale in terms of deaths. So, I think that it's another tactic and a way to sort of guilt women into thinking that we need to be grateful, and so therefore we can't really look behind the curtain and see what abortion has done to us and what the movement has done to us.
Right. Cannot help but comment on that. I just wanted to really think about what she's saying. She's saying that when you look at deaths across the entire world, all the causes, so that's death by lightning, death by car accidents, death by mosquitoes, death by chronic disease, whatever category that death is in, there are less deaths worldwide from all categories of dying than there are deaths by abortion. There are more abortions, right, than there's death apart from abortion. And she's putting it into perspective. She's saying, listen, if you add up all the deaths associated with the World War II, where Hitler was spearheading the charge against the rest of Europe and trying to overtake Europe, and the Americans had to go across, and the British had to fight, and it was in Japan and Australia and all over the place. If you gather up all those deaths, all right, these abortion figures are washing that, like making that look like nothing. When you gather all the deaths under Stalin and the Soviet Union, and you gather all the deaths under Maoist China, all these are communist regimes. The amount of deaths that we're having by abortion is making those numbers look small. So we see the Hitler and we see the Stalin and we see the Mao, but we don't see the abortions. We don't see how much death is happening as a result of these abortions. I'm trying to tell you, it's nothing new. It's the same devil, same tactics. Lie to people and kill them. What did the devil do in Exodus when Moses was being born? Kill all the children. What did he do when Jesus was being born? Kill all the children. All right? What's the god Molech about? Remember in the Bible, you got this Molech figure sacrificing children unto the god. Okay? This abortion thing just passes by our minds if we just think it's part of society, but we have no idea how much carnage, how much death is happening as a result of this. It's the devil. The devil is a liar and a murderer.
You obviously address the patriarchy in the book. Your subtitle is How Smashing the Patriarchy Has Destroyed Us.
Right.
Now, most women, when they hear that term patriarchy, their mind sort of goes to the suppression of women. So how did getting rid or attempting to smash the patriarchy, how do you argue that actually is a harm to women?
Yeah. Again, this is another hard thing. I've heard so many people define patriarchy in very, very different terms. I mean, there's a whole side story that goes with that. But I think that the reality is that what we've done is belittle men, and we have made men, the goal, one of the stated goals, especially in the 70s of feminism, was to get rid of gender altogether. And a highly effective way of destroying the family and the authority of a father in the home was really by destroying the fabric of society. So Kate Millett was a big proponent of this. We need to promote homosexuality, prostitution, promiscuity, all these things that were not, key issues back in the 60s. And now, of course, they're very mainstream. But along with that has come the silencing of men through feminism. So again, we see this power play. But men have a natural set of gifts that are different than men. And I think that that's what's really happened when you set half of a population against the other half of the population. Again, this is where Marx come in, because men are by default, they're male, they are the oppressors, and by default, females are the oppressed. I mean, that's just the terms that they've been working with. The most of us are sort of getting in the ether and sort of have an expectation that's how it works. By default, they've done nothing wrong objectively, but they are just wrong because they're men. So that's I think the fundamental crux is when you pit the sexes against each other. What's really going to happen is again a further breaking of the family, further control over society, because broken people are much harder to control than intact families are. So there's a whole underpinning of communist ideology, woke ideology, critical theory that's running through this that I think a lot of us, we're not familiar with. It's feels very foreign, and we've also been told that masculinity is toxic. So it's hard to sort of parse these things out, and I try to make a lot of that clear in the book to just help women realize, like, no, this is intentional, and this battle of the sexes has not helped us because it's creating all these women who, and maybe this is one of the saddest things, is just the women that I meet who have really followed through on the feminist ideology, and they get to their 40s, 50s, 60s, and they think, well, I have a lot of money and I have a good career, but I'm lonely. My parents have died. I don't have children. There's this deep desire to love and be loved, and it's too late for them to have children. And what do we do at this point when we've realized, like, maybe this wasn't what I really wanted. Maybe this was not the path I wanted. So those, I think, are the really sad stories. Is obviously God has a plan for their lives, but it's just harder to figure that out when you get to a point where you've sort of been painted into a corner by an ideology that you didn't realize was going to leave you in this situation.
Mm-hmm. Well, you really do such a beautiful job, and I so appreciate that you parse out so much of this so thoroughly in the book, The End of Woman. And you alluded to it just a moment ago, but I appreciate, and I find it really fascinating how you do explain how the feminist movement has led to so much as far as what we're seeing now with the push of transgenderism, and that it's not a coincidence maybe that we are where we are. And I really just thought that was fascinating that you explain, no, this is how we got here. And it's been a long time coming.
Yeah, no, it's definitely been a long time coming. And I think, one of the trends that I've been following, just as an aside over the years too, is just even what we're seeing with the pet craze in our country. We spend $700 million on pet costumes each year. That's just an astounding amount of money. And I think what it points to in many respects is that women have this desire to mother someone or something. We even are seeing, pet or plant parents now. And I think, in a certain respect, it's very hopeful because it means it hasn't been crushed out of us, and we're not meant to mother just biologically. We're also meant to mother others psychologically and spiritually, which means we nourish them. We provide a place of shelter and protection for people to grow into the people that they're meant to be. If you're looking for a more specific definition of motherhood, but that's one of the byproducts is if we, you take children and grandchildren away from women, then this is not going away. This is something that's sort of part of the core of who we are, and that's where we're seeing it. So, between pets and the trans issue, and all of this incapacity to really even define what a woman is, all of these things have been kind of on a slow burn for a long time, and we're seeing the real fruits of them.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. The book is The End of Woman: How Smashing the Patriarchy Has Destroyed Us. It is out and available on August 15th, but it's available for pre-order now. You can get it wherever books are sold.
Yeah, so let me just wrap up here myself with these few comments. So again, she's just pointing out the devastation that feminism brings about on people. She's saying, look, it's not helping the women, okay? She's saying that the amount of women that she meets who have held true to the feminist ideology that end up in lives that are very empty, destitute, and void of love and connection is very, very disturbing and very heart-wrenching. Because the feminism tells you to prioritize career, prioritize money, prioritize power, prioritize advance, okay? It doesn't tell you to prioritize relationships. It doesn't tell you to. It discourages you from settling down with one man and marrying. It discourages you from having children. Obviously, if you don't have children, you won't have grandchildren. And now she's saying that these ladies are coming up into their older years and they have no connections. And it's a big problem. You know why? Because God made us a certain way. God made women a certain way. He made women in such a way that they would want to mother, that they would want to have children. that they would want to take care of children and that they would want to take care of a family and see to the well-being of a family. That's not by chance. That's what women are like. That's what they have in them. Okay? It's not social constructionism as some people would like to suggest. It's the default God-given programming of a woman to nurture and to take care of stuff. And as these feminists pursue the feminist ideology and believe the propaganda and the lie, they find themselves without children, without family. And that's why they spend $700 million in pet costumes alone. She hasn't even talked about pet food and pet care and all that. $700 million in pet costumes. This is women buying pet costumes for the pets that they have, the pet being a replacement for the lack of emotional connection that she would have usually have gotten from a husband and children and grandchildren. She doesn't have that. So now she has to go and buy a dog or a cat. You always hear the idea of women having 50 cats and dying alone. That's exactly what she's talking about there. She's saying that that's what's happening because we spend $700 million in pet costumes alone. Right? So, in wrapping it up, I just hope that you're seeing, and again, please, by all means, this podcast that we're looking at here is the Daily Signal. They have some cool stuff. And when you get a chance, if you're interested, listen to some of the other podcasts that Carrie Gress and Rachel Wilson are featured in and get a good sense of what this thing is like. It's really, really toxic and not of God. You see, the thing about us is that we're not digging into these things on a regular basis. Why would we? I got work to do. I got bills to pay. I got stuff to do. I go to work and go and do my work and so on. You watch a little TV, you watch a little radio, you play some music and you hear music as you go into work in the bus, or maybe you at the shop and you hear music. Maybe you're at the restaurant, you hear music and you hear ideas and you watch the news. But the devil is programming the whole society, sending his messages in different places and schools and such. And essentially, eventually, the message trickles into your mind. And over time, you start to think a certain way and you start to be conditioned to believe that certain things are true and that certain things are not true. If you're not reading the Word of God, if you're not paying attention to the Word of God and prioritizing that, you can be deceived, men and women. You can be deceived. And that is all feminism is. It is a massive lie. Here, these ladies are exposing the origins and the people responsible for bringing it about. So we can see clearly that this is a demonic initiative. This is a demonic thing. And all of the doctrines that they're teaching are demonic. But some ladies that are Christians will still hear this. And because the conditioning is so deeply ingrained in them, they would feel as if something is dying inside of them as they see that feminism is a lie and a devilish lie. They are still opposed to the idea of submission, opposed to the idea of undertaking a feminine role in a family, because this ideology has crept into their minds and into their hearts so deeply that they are now identifying with this system of thought. They are now claiming the devil's creation as their own identity. I don't want to be submissive like Sarah. I want to be a boss babe like Jezebel. Right? I don't want to be obedient to my husband like Sarah. I want to be Vashti and I want to disobey because nobody can tell me where to come and when to come. And even if you dethrone me, so be it. But I am not going to be part of your nuclear family that's productive and that produces children and carries on the legacy of humanity. I'm not going to be part of that. I'm going to be independent and alone and I can abort my children. You got people that will still hold on to that doctrine as if that is life, when clearly is anything but life. This thing runs so deep. I don't know if we will have the opportunity, but there's a podcast that these two gentlemen were having outlining the devastation that one man went through in the divorce courts. And it really shows you that feminism is no joke, my friend. It is not a side act. It is a serious, pernicious doctrine that the devil has concocted and that he has propagated over the minds and the thoughts of people. And he's destroying lives and destroying the society with it. And because we don't understand it, and we don't understand who it's from, and we don't read our Bible, or we don't want to submit to God's commands, we just go along thinking that feminism is a harmless thing. It's not. It is deeply devilish and very, very, very destructive. Okay? We'll see what we have time for and how we pick it up. But I'm hoping that you're recognizing that this is not a normal thing. This is an alien doctrine directed at destroying women and destroying the family at large and destroying the society at large and really destroying the fabric of humanity and killing all the children in its warpath. Right? That is what feminism is. Right? Don't be fooled. This ain't no harmless doctrine. This is a serious, wicked, destructive ideology. Anyhow, we can close now. Let me just have a quick word of prayer and then we'll wrap it up. So, Heavenly Father, I just want to thank you again for the internet that allows us to access so much information. It could be a bad thing, it could be a good thing, but we pray that you help us to allow it to be a good thing in our lives. We thank you for the work of these ladies, digging deep into the origins and the primary sources and pulling out the pertinent information for us to see and to expose the truth behind these demonic constructs, these demonic doctrines, these demonic ideas, and helping us to see them for what they are. I pray, Lord, that you help us to denounce these things and to discard these things and to disassociate ourselves from these things and to choose your way, to choose righteousness, to choose godliness, to choose love, patience, humility on both sides, men and women, to choose your way and to reject the feminist lies and the feminist propaganda and the lies of society in general. Lord, we are in need of your help. Please help us. Please help us to read the word of God, your word. Help us to become properly acquainted with your word, that we can easily spot the devil. We can easily spot the lies because we are so au fait and familiar with your truth. Lord, we ask that you help us in all of this. I pray all this in the name of Jesus. Amen. Hi guys, Joel Brooks here at the Insight Podcast. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video or found it informative, interesting, or helpful in any way, please give it a like and consider sharing it with your friends. If you want to stay connected, you can check us out at our website, insight.joelbrooksonline.com, and you can also check us out on social media. Links in the description below. Thanks again for watching, and God bless.